I'm Tim Ventura, and we're joined today by Dr. Diana Pasulka, a professor of religious studies and chair of the Department of Philosophy and Religion at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. Dr. Pasulka has a BA from the University of California, an MA from the Jesuit School of Theology in Berkeley, and a Ph.D. from Syracuse University, and has served as the chair of the Department of Philosophy and Religion at the North Carolina Wilmington, where she is currently a professor. She also acts as a consultant for movies about the Catholic and religious supernatural, such as The Conjuring. Dr. Pasulka's research centers on contemporary connections between technology and human belief in the context of religious history, as highlighted by her two recent books, American Cosmic: UFOs, Religion, Technology, and Encounters: Experiences with Nonhuman Intelligences. So, Diana, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today. It is a pleasure and an honor to have you with me. I have been trying to get you on the show for months now. I'm glad that you're finally here.
Thank you so
Today,
much. I'm happy to be here. Yeah.
we are exploring themes from your recent book, American Cosmic: UFOs, Religion, and Technology. And given our headlines this year, I can't think of a better time to dive in. So your approach is unique in looking not only at the scientific and cultural factors of UFOs, but also the belief systems that are involved with this. So let me start out by asking, what was your inspiration to write American Cosmic?
Sure. That's a great question. So I've been studying the belief in religion, and my academic discipline is religious studies, which is interdisciplinary. So when we come at belief, we look at it from different disciplines like material belief, archaeology, things like that, history, sociology. And we take all of these different methods and disciplines and we use them to identify patterns of belief over time and the cultural effects of belief in things that a lot of times we don't have evidence for. So belief in UFOs would be in that category, something that we don't have evidence for. At least that's how I started my this study that began in 2012. I was a non-believer, and people in my field, we don't actually weigh in on the truth or falseness of claims of religious things. And so I was approaching the study of UFO cultures with this frame in mind. And what I quickly learned was that a lot of very, very credentialed people believed and were actively studying UFOs. I did not know this. And this was in 2012. And so my book was published in 2019 and it was finished in 2017. So when the New York Times articles by Leslie Kean, Ralph Blumenthal, and Helene Cooper came out, I was surprised, but I also knew that this was on the way because I had just, I was in the midst of writing this. And I have to say that it definitely changed my viewpoint on a lot of things, especially UFO cultures.
Well, and we will definitely get into that. Again, your book is incredibly timely. I mean, it just like right on the money in terms of timing. So, but a big part of the book itself describes a cross-country journey in search of UFO parts with a scientist who has since been revealed to be none other than Dr. Gary Nolan. So I want to ask how this journey came about and what working with him was like, and how did that help shape your views on UFOs?
Yeah, sure. So at the time I wrote the book, Gary, of course, did not want to be known as himself because of the stigma related to the study of UFOs. And I agreed, he chose his own pseudonym for the book, which was James. And then the other scientist I was working with was involved in the Space Force, and he was a mission controller. And he really he led Gary and I to look at these UFO debris, which I have to admit I did not believe in when I started this study. So what happened was that I had met this man who I called Tyler, and he was very interested in the place of consciousness in the study of UFOs. So he had been studying UFOs as a hobby, he said, for many, many years. He was involved in the space shuttle program. he has many patents, and he was really extraordinary. And so I was, of course, he was among the people who I was looking into in terms of understanding how did they actually believe this? Because when I have to admit, when I went into the study, I was a non-believer. And so I thought, these are very intelligent people and they have amazing credentials and their claims are extraordinary. And so, of course, I had to follow up on this. So he actually reached out to me because he was interested in the history of religions. He knew that aerial phenomena had been recorded in almost every major religious tradition. And other things about those aerial phenomena have been recorded too, like the people who interfaced with them and, other kinds of things. So he wanted that data. He was really interested in that. And he told me that this was the next place where the information about UFOs would come. So I started to work with him. And so then what happened was he said to me, it's obvious that you don't actually believe in UFOs as a real thing. You think of them as something that people imagine. And so I'd like to take you to a place where you get to see that they're actually real. And but it has to be in this place in New Mexico, and you have to wear a blindfold, and it's a secret place. And so of course I thought that was strange, but the whole thing was weird. So I agreed to go, but I said I needed to take a friend with me. I had met Gary, and he was incredibly, he was an amazing scientist and just extremely curious and on fire with this study. So I asked him if he wanted to go with me, and of course he did. So I proposed this to Tyler, and Tyler looked into Gary's background and said yes. So we all flew to New Mexico. We went out to this crash site, and we spent that day and the next day looking for these parts. And then Gary brought them back and put them, studied them. And so that's really how that happened.
Yeah. Well, the thing that I'm smiling because I'm just trying to visualize you guys on a road trip, right? And so every time I think about that, I'm just like, okay, don't smile so much. But so you guys traveled to the alleged crash site in New Mexico and actually found pieces of what might be some type of UFO wreckage. So science might call this productive expedition, but thousands of other people make similar journeys every year. Speaking from a religious perspective, could you call this a pilgrimage? And again, I have met so many people who've gone down to these alleged crash sites and looked for debris. In fact, I have a friend who was analyzing some right now that came the same way. A colleague of his went down and scoured the desert and found some stuff, sent it back. He's doing analysis on it. For people who believe in the UFO phenomena, do you think that's a pilgrimage?
Oh, it absolutely is a pilgrimage. And I talked about it in American Cosmic, how what I did was I put it in the context of going to Lourdes for Catholics, or, something like that. People in religions, they make pilgrimages, and these are like sacred sites to them, places of power. And so I recognized when I was there with Gary and Tyler that for them it was this place, this sacred place. They called it the donation site. And it was, and I still didn't believe in it, to tell you the truth, even as I was writing the book. And Tyler did say, he said, you're confronted with actual debris. You see it, it's in this place. I gave you the history of this place. There are, people who saw this crash, when they were children back in the 1940s. And now you still don't believe. And I guess it's because, I just didn't know. Now that things are coming out, I'm amazed that I was so attentive. I wrote down all the details and all the data, and that's actually really important because a lot of this stuff is coming out now. And the stuff that I wrote down was stuff that didn't actually make sense, but in retrospect makes complete sense. So it's only in retrospect when I look at it that I recognize how amazing that journey was.
Yeah. Well, that reminds me of like the Shroud of Turin, right? Where you see something and then there are all these questions and maybe part of that is the intrinsic power that that has, you know? I mean, we grow up hearing these stories and, you know, and then to actually see something like that, you know, maybe there's just this difficulty accepting it in front of you know? And that's why they come back to the Shroud and say, well, you know, perhaps this was some kind of artwork by Da Vinci or you know, lots of other explanations other than this was, you know, the burial cloth for Jesus because it's just so much power. I don't know. I'm just spitballing, but you know,
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm still, I was trained to have a certain perspective, and I still have that perspective, and it's one of not making a conclusion. Basically, like Tyler said, do you know how many people would be amazed where you're standing, doing what you're doing, and it's like nothing for you? And I was like, no, it's not. It's not nothing. It's just that I'm not going to go full in, like all in. I'm gonna hold back my belief at this point, and I still do.
well, I think, and again, American Cosmic, in your perspective, is a key to the UFO phenomena. And the reason I say that is there are two halves to this phenomena. One of them is what's actually going on, right? The phenomenology itself, the science, you know, what we can document, what we have data for. And that's still, in some ways, it's still not much. We're still learning. The other half of this is the belief. And you know, as you've written, I mean, American culture has had UFOs in it since 1947. You've written that over half of American adults, over 75% of young Americans believe in intelligent extraterrestrial life. It's a level of belief that rivals belief in God. And what I would say from personal experience, I do a lot of defense interviews. I have a lot of contacts in the scientific and defense establishment. Over half of them have some level of belief in UFOs. There's a stigma. And so it's a quiet belief, right? And in many ways, this parallels religion. And so that's why I think what you've written and your perspectives are so important because it helps unravel the human part of this phenomenon. Um, so one thing I did want to ask was uh, Christianity has been declining in the United States over this same period of time since 1947. UFOs have been growing in belief. Christianity has been eroding. Um, has this erosion in mainstream religious belief led to a belief gap that UFOs are beginning to fill?
Definitely. I think that the inclination, humans are inclined towards religiosity. I mean, we just are. We're inclined to believe in something greater than ourselves because I think we live in an amazing, mysterious universe. So we need this kind of, uh, structure or infrastructure. And I think that the mystical impulse that we have is fulfilled by the belief in UFOs. Absolutely. I definitely think this is the case. That's why you can even see within UFO cultures, different denominations, right? You see, some people believe in like Pleiadians or something like that. Some people just believe that maybe UFOs are advanced species, a form of AI or something like that. Or post biological. So you have various different beliefs, some of which see them, even people who are religious have beliefs about UFOs as well. They're, demons or angels, they have their categories for belief. But no matter how you believe in them, and there are so many different ways, it's definitely a rising belief, and even more so today.
Well, in terms of these multiple belief systems, UFO culture, you know, is selling extraterrestrial wisdom. Transhumanist culture has biological immortality. The singularity and singularitarians predict godlike artificial intelligence, and the New Age has what you might call Gnostic mastery of suppressed ancient wisdom. So I'm wondering if we could view all of these as competitors in a marketplace of modern belief systems that are seeking to fill this belief gap.
Yes, absolutely. So I think that religions have always sprung up like this. So there are competing religions. Even back in early Christianity, a lot of Christians and even non-Christians think of Christianity as this linear progression through time, right? So Jesus was crucified, and then the belief is that he was resurrected, and then Christianity kind of like goes along. But that's not what happened. So if you look back in the first century, around that time period, you'll see that there were so many different denominations of Christianity competing with each other at the time for different followers. So it's really kind of been that way from the beginning.
Well, and that was one of the things I thought. You have sects appearing, as you'd mentioned
Yes.
earlier, right? Some
Mhm.
people believe in this, some people believe in that, and then you have these different belief systems, and again, like transhumanism has nothing to do with UFOs, neither does the singularity necessarily, but we have all of these little groups that are trying to fill what appears to be this gap, I guess. Um, so one of the things that I really wanted to touch on was, uh, in terms of belief, over the last couple of years, the U.S. government has been digging into UFO reports from U.S. military personnel, as we're all aware of. They have been very careful not to mention this 70 plus years of cultural mythology. That is until David Grush went public with stories about crashed flying saucers, UFO reverse engineering, and recovered alien bodies. So one of the things, again, your expertise is invaluable for this, is what do you think about this change of narrative from really kind of an agnostic scientific approach back towards this established mythology?
Yes, I think that is fascinating. And I did try to grapple with this in American Cosmic when I called it the rebirth of Prometheus, right? So the myth of Prometheus is this Greek myth that this god is giving us technology and giving humans technology, and that what are we going to do with it, right? So in a sense, I saw this taking place in the New Mexico crash site with Tyler and Gary calling it the donation site, and really, even though Gary knows about the myth of Prometheus, I don't think he's consciously doing it, right? I don't think he's consciously saying, I'm living this myth, right? But to me, as a person who studies kind of like myths and how they work on a mass scale, I thought it was really this kind of rebirth of it. And it was really difficult for me to take what I had learned about religion and apply it here, because this was too real. So with Catholic culture and my Catholic history studies, it was very easy to talk about, these myths showing and doing this, but you never actually get the FBI calling you up and asking you about your last book about Catholic culture, but you do with the UFO culture. And so it became so much more real. And there you have the actual stuff, right? Even though Catholic culture does have the Shroud of Turin, people can't go up and touch it, right? So people can't bring it back to their house and, hey, I'm going to put it in the lab and, we're going to look at it through this microscope. So there was a sense of realism there that I hadn't actually encountered in religion up to that point. And I had to re-theorize what the heck was going on. And I'm still doing that, to tell you the truth. I think that this is a great challenge for people in academic studies of all sorts, is this clashing between what we consider to be a mythology and actual reality. So it's unprecedented in my view. And honestly, I'm still thinking it through. It's not like I have a ready kind of, hey, this is the best method or framework of looking at it. Another thing I had to do was I had to revise my methods of study, because most of what we hear about is under classified, it's classified. It's like a classified paywall. There's no way you're going to get in there. You don't have a need to know. So how do you do a history of this type of culture? Well, we do have precedents for that. So part of my work on Catholic history was a work on Irish Catholicism, and it was there was a point when a lot of the Catholic history of Ireland was being lost because of colonization, English colonization. But where it was held? It was held in a lot of oral traditions, like the bardic traditions, the tradition of songs and things like that, and this, folkloric cultures. So I went back to that. I went back to my methods in doing that, and I resuscitated them. And I thought, I think I could actually use this now by being in places where people are talking about this and listening to the lore, and and putting together information that these people said over here. They have no connection to these people over here, yet they're saying the same thing. So that's kind of how we reconstruct ancient cultures, is we're using these sources from different places that corroborate each other and have no relation to each other. So it's kind of identifying this earlier source of oral tradition. People do that in biblical studies, looking at the texts and so forth. So this is what I was doing. I was basically resuscitating these kinds of strategies for identifying, intelligence community cultures and, what was known, not to try to break any kind of classified, data or anything like that. Don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. But what I was doing was I was like learning that you can't be just a normal academic and do this work. You have to actually use some different methods.
Yeah. Well, and again, with this collection of stories, right? This collection of myths and legends and lore coming from hundreds of different places and with different levels of credibility, right? And there are so many unknowns there. And it started out as just this loose collection of unrelated myths. But over the last few years, I think a central narrative has started to emerge, featuring Roswell, Area 51, alien bodies, things along those lines. And I'm almost wondering if today's congressional hearings might be similar to the Council of Nicaea, where we collectively come together and decide which of these stories become canon or heresy.
Yes. Okay. So I do understand it similar to that. And we have to always remember that even though there might be an official narrative, because we're being, in a sense, it's hard to say, because a lot, when the mainstream media covers the congressional hearings, there's still a lot of stigma associated with that. People are laughing and things like that. So that didn't happen during the Council of Nicaea. Okay, so you didn't get this kind of stigma. People actually believed back in what they were doing back in that time period. You did get people who didn't agree with them, okay, and their books were burned. Okay, there were heresies that were, these were considered heretical. So yeah, you see a lot of competing narratives about the UFO right now and the military version of the UFO, but I wouldn't say that I wouldn't say that it's mainstream at all. I think that it's still a stigmatized, issue.
Okay, so it's still on its way. It's still kind of evolving and emerging, so to speak. So in terms of these stories, TV shows like Ancient Aliens have also been reinterpreting religious artwork and biblical stories like the Wheel of Ezekiel as evidence for UFOs influencing ancient human culture. So one of the things that I really wanted to ask about is if we are also, in addition to collecting these modern stories and organizing them, are we recasting old gods into new form for the modern era? And do you think that this might be an example of kind of co-opting the mythology that Christianity itself has been so often accused of doing?
Right. Okay. So there is something like that happening, in my estimation. And how I look at it is that, first, yes, I do think that's the case. But also that when you do a deep dive into the stories, either the contemporary stories or the stories from historical time, which I've done in a couple of my essays that are published out there and free for anybody who wants to look at them, is that you see that the people have these experiences, and then people write about the experiences. And when the people write about the experiences, it's usually not the person who has the experience. The writing changes what is experienced, and the representation that goes out is different from what the person actually experienced. So there's this second order of representation that gets changed. Okay. And that I think we have to be concerned about. So, you see this in Catholic culture. So with, say, a Catholic saint like Teresa of Avila, who has an experience of an entity that she can't place. She thinks it's an angel, but it might not be. It's very strange. She actually then says, yes, it has to be a cherub, some kind of small angel. Well, it's about 3 feet tall and shiny, and and it has a dart-like instrument. Okay, so it looks suspicious there, and so she talks about it. But when it gets relayed to Catholics, that story goes through the process of redaction. It goes through a process of Catholics, usually, men, editing it down and changing it and saying she didn't see it this isn't a live thing that she saw. This isn't living, a corporeal angel. It's she imagined it. But that's not what she said. She actually said, this is real, So you see how this gets changed. It gets changed today too. So, people will have these experiences. They go through a database like a MUFON or, a UFO database, and they'll put their story in there. And then that story will be taken and represented as entertainment and completely changed from their original story. So I think that we have to be, who's going to care about this other than the people who are like the academics and, and the actual people that are having these experiences. But this does happen.
Well, and I think that mainstream science has been doing a lot of this redaction. When you mentioned that, the story that immediately came to my mind, for me, this was just one of those surprising and kind of mind-blowing things. But so I've been doing a lot of interviews on life in the universe and the Drake equation, right, which predicts that the universe should be full of life. There's something associated with that called the Fermi paradox. So there was this lunchtime discussion where Enrico Fermi, very famous physicist, and a few of his colleagues were sitting down and discussing, presumably, life in the universe and the Drake equation and things like that. Enrico Fermi says, well, if the universe is full of life, where are they? What is not well known about that is that lunchtime discussion where Enrico Fermi asks, where are they, was inspired by a cartoon of a UFO in, I believe it was the New York Times. It was a cartoon of UFO with little aliens stealing garbage cans, and it was a kind of a humorous thing. So here we have UFOs being the inspiration for this question, right? And it seems like that's some sort of redaction where he's saying, okay, well, that's not real. That's not real. There's nobody here, but I mean, that's what inspired it. I mean,
yeah, actually, I just wrote about this. I'm doing an encyclopedia entry for Oxford, and I revisited this, and this is how I do my research, so I can explain it. Okay, so what you just told me, this is the general idea of how the Fermi paradox became a popular culture icon, right? So we talk about the Fermi paradox and this discussion between physicists that was inspired by this cartoon. I know people who know the people who were in that discussion. So this is how I would do my research now, whereas I didn't do this before. So I not only look at everything that's ever written about the Fermi paradox, and you can see that it's from the New Yorker. That cartoon is from the New Yorker, and you can actually go. You can identify that. You can like Google it, I think, and I say, give me the Fermi paradox cartoon from the New Yorker, and you'll see it. So I have all that written documentation, but I also have access to the oral culture of that specific conversation. And one of the people is an invisible college person, and his doctoral advisor was at that meeting, right? And it was a lunch meeting, and it was at Los Alamos Labs, and they were all going to lunch, part of the Manhattan Project. And they were talking about UFOs, and then they dropped it. And then Fermi asks, well, where is everybody, right? And they were all shocked because they didn't know exactly what he was talking about. And then they just surmised that he must have been talking about that. Okay, so was the cartoon the oral tradition says the cartoon wasn't a part of it, but I don't know. So you see how it's really difficult to kind of reconstruct these events. But let me tell you something about another conversation I had about the Fermi paradox just recently too, with a historian of NASA. NASA's historian of space is Stephen Dick. And this is so he's actually written about this, and he said that it could very well be an answer to the paradox of where is everyone. They could all have, if given the timeline of us and technology and this idea of a singularity of some sort, it could very well be that we just don't recognize the way in which they appear, because they aren't like us. They aren't biological. They're post-biological. They're AI, or they're somehow technology. Okay. So his term for this is they're post-biological.
Okay. Okay. Well,
So we as biological entities wouldn't, we would not recognize them.
yeah, there is so much that is involved with this. And in the future, I would love to have you back on and go through more of this, because I feel like we're just scratching the surface of, I mean, it's belief and life and what we understand about ourselves and the universe and our place in it. So let me thank you so much for your time today. Again, absolute pleasure and a true honor to have you with me. I want to close by asking, what comes next for you, and where do you anticipate seeing UFOs in the near future? Because again, this is just making headlines, right? I mean, it's like every month there's some new earth-shattering headline about UFOs. Do you have any thoughts about where we may see this in the future, and where this is going in terms of the cultural phenomena and the belief system that's associated with it?
Yeah, great question. So I believe that we are going to see more, right, coming from the congressional hearings. I'm as shocked as everyone else, by the way. And I also, in terms of what's next, I just finished this book called Encounters about, I decided to go back to, people who experience these things and really just do a deep dive into experiences of people who have credible experiences and what do they have to say. So basically just data, collecting more data about it and keeping an open mind. So I do think we'll see more, and prepare to be shocked.
Wonderful. Thank you again so much for your time today.
Thank you.